Ever wonder why our minds chase status or obsess over luxury? This is Mind Matters. I'm Ivana, shining a light on the psychology behind our everyday pursuits, from money stress to social standing. I explore how we think so we can reshape our world from the inside out, because in the end, every mind matters. Hello and welcome to Mind Matters. Each episode, I look at all the ways psychology sneaks into everyday life. I'm Ivana, and I handle the research and writing for this show. Today, we're talking about metacommunication and paralanguage. But don't worry if those words sound complicated. Essentially, we're exploring all the extra, often unspoken cues we use when we talk to each other. Think about the difference between saying, I'm fine, in a cheerful tone versus a flat, half-mumbled, I'm fine. Big difference, right? These subtle layers of communication matter more than we might realize. They can shape how we connect with friends, colleagues, and even strangers. We'll also check out how confirmation bias, the tendency to latch onto information that fits what we already believe, can color the way we interpret someone's tone or body language. There's some interesting research linking this bias to our dopaminergic system, which influences how our brains process rewards and learn from experiences. That means that when we hear what we expect and believe, our brains make it feel like a reward. We'll take a look at a few key studies. Samuel Mateus on metacommunication as second-order communication, basically talking about how we talk. Mark D. Pell and Laura L. Skorup on how kids become more sensitive to vocal cues over time. Philip Schmid and Cornelia Betsch on how small changes in your voice can sway how others judge or believe you. Alistair Pennycook on how these nonverbal elements vary across cultures. And finally, Toon Dierdahl Solbrekke and Tom Engelsrud on the importance of metacommunication in supervision. But we'll apply those insights to everyday life too. By the end, you'll have a few practical ways to tweak how you talk and listen so you can communicate more clearly. Sounds good? Let's get started. So, what is metacommunication? If you've ever paused in the middle of a text argument to say something like, hey, I'm not yelling, my caps lock just got stuck. You've done a bit of metacommunication. You're explaining how to interpret your message so there's no misunderstanding. Samuel Mateus, 2017, describes metacommunication as second-order communication. It's the layer that tells someone what your words really mean in context. Are you joking, being sarcastic, or dead serious? It's also how you reveal your communication style. Maybe you talk fast because you're excited, or you keep your reply short because you're busy. If you make that clear from the start, you save everyone a bunch of confusion down the road. Let's say you have a friend who loves sending a very brief text messages, just K or sure, without any additional context. You might assume they're annoyed or don't want to chat, but if they let you know they're usually juggling 3 things at once and that's just how they text, you can relax and not read too much into it. That's metacommunication in action. It's also helpful in more serious settings, like giving feedback at work. Before you critique a coworker's project, you might say, I want to share some thoughts, but please know I'm trying to help, not tear down your idea. By clarifying your intent, you guide how they interpret your comments. Toon Dierdahl Solbrekke and Tom Engelsrud, 2011, highlight this idea in the context of academic supervision, but it translates easily to personal and professional relationships. If we don't talk about the how, misunderstandings can brew, even when we genuinely have good intentions. Now, let's dig into paralanguage, which covers the nonverbal elements of speech, like tone, pitch, volume, pacing, and even pauses. Think of a time you've said hello to someone. If you sounded rushed or distracted, you might have unintentionally given the impression you didn't really want to talk, even if that wasn't the case at all. According to Mark D. Pell and Laura L. Skorup, 2017, children gradually become more aware of these vocal cues as they grow. When you're little, you might rely more on facial expressions and simpler cues, like a loud voice equals someone's angry. A high-pitched squeal might mean someone's excited. As we get older, we fine-tune these interpretations, but here's the deal. Many adults still miss important signals, especially if we're multitasking or we assume we already know what the other person is feeling. For example, imagine you're at a busy cafe catching up with a friend you haven't seen in years. You're both excited, but the environment is very noisy. You might start talking louder or faster without noticing, and your friend could think you're anxious or pressed for time. Meanwhile, your friend might lean in and speak quietly, causing you to wonder if he is upset. In reality, it's just the cafe noise messing with your usual vocal habits. Picking up on these cues like, okay, he's leaning in because it's loud, not because he's feeling down, helps keep everyone on the same page. Cultural differences also show up in paralanguage. Alistair Pennycook, 1985, noted that gestures, facial expressions, and vocal modifications are deeply tied to cultural norms. In some cultures, talking passionately and using lots of hand motions is seen as warm and engaged. In other places, it might come across as aggressive or overwhelming. We all traveled or lived abroad, and you've probably experienced a moment where you realize, oh, wow, I might be overdoing it or underdoing it compared to what people expect here. How do we navigate all these unwritten rules? A lot of it is just about being observant and open to small cues in voice and body language. If you're the loud talker in a soft-spoken group, you can tone it down slightly. If you tend to mutter or trail off, you might speak a bit more clearly. These little adjustments can make a big difference in how others perceive and understand you, whether it's a new neighbor or someone you're trying to impress on a first date. Now, let's bring confirmation bias into the picture. This is the tendency we all have to look for evidence that supports what we already believe and ignore or downplay evidence that doesn't. If you think your neighbor is unfriendly, you'll probably notice every short reply or half smile, while conveniently overlooking the time she offered to water your plants. What's fascinating is that confirmation bias has roots in our brain's dopaminergic system, which is linked to how we process rewards and reinforcement. A study in the Journal of Neuroscience, 2011, suggests that specific dopaminergic genes affect how strongly we cling to our existing beliefs. Essentially, when something confirms what we already think, see, I knew my neighbor was cold, our brain gives us a little reward signal that makes us feel validated. How does this tie back to paralanguage and metacommunication? Well, if you're convinced someone doesn't like you, you'll probably interpret their neutral tone as rude, their casual shrug as dismissive, and their short text reply as irritated. The actual content of their words might be harmless, but your bias colors those subtle signs. Over time, you can end up with a completely skewed view of that person. The same thing can happen in group settings. Maybe you're on a team with folks from several countries, and you've heard a stereotype that people from country X are blunt. You might latch on to any moment someone from country X speaks with a direct tone, ignoring the times they speak gently or even share jokes. Your brain essentially says, aha, evidence that they're always blunt because you've primed yourself to notice it. Being aware of confirmation bias is half the battle. Once you realize you might be filtering out conflicting information, you can catch yourself. Maybe the neighbor's half smile isn't rudeness. It's just her tired expression after a long day. Maybe that coworker's directness is their way of being efficient, not mean. By questioning our own assumptions, we start to interpret people's paralanguage and metacommunicative signals in a fairer, more balanced way. I've touched on culture a bit, but let's expand that to how our surroundings can shape these communication quirks. In Luxembourg, where people might switch between French, German, and Luxembourgish, with some English in the mix, they often rely heavily on tone and body language to fill in gaps when words don't translate perfectly. If you only focus on literal words, you might miss the warmth or nuance behind them. But even outside multilingual hotspots, environment plays a big role. Picture a noisy open-plan office. Conversations echo, people rush around, phones ring. In that setting, folks may speak louder, drop the usual polite small talk, and cut straight to the point. A coworker might interpret that as impatience or curtness, when in fact it's just practicality in a chaotic space. If that same conversation happened in a quiet corner or cozy coffee shop, the tone might shift entirely. Cultural norms also influence how we design and use spaces. In some regions, you might have wide, open gathering areas meant to encourage group chats. In others, privacy is valued more, leading to smaller partition spaces. Each environment nudges us toward different styles of communication. We might lean in closer, gesture more, or even speak in a softer tone, depending on how intimate or formal the space feels. The key is to realize these are all factors we can adapt to. If you're in a busy environment, maybe mention it up front. It's a bit chaotic here, so I'm going to speak up, but I'm not upset. That's a mini dose of metacommunication that can prevent misunderstandings. And if you're sensitive to noise or certain cultural styles, giving yourself a moment to recognize that can help you respond thoughtfully instead of taking someone's loud tone at face value. We've covered a lot of ground, everything from how metacommunication sets the tone for our words to the role paralanguage plays in revealing emotion or intent, to the little sneaky ways confirmation bias can twist our perceptions. Let's bring it all together with a few practical tips you can use right away. Try naming your communication style. If you know you tend to give short text replies or speak faster when excited, just let people know. Something like, if I'm short in my text, don't worry. I'm probably just in a rush, not angry. This little heads up can save friends and family a ton of second guessing. Remember to check your interpretations. Next time you feel someone is snappy or distant, ask yourself if that might be confirmation bias. Have you already labeled them as snappy or distant, causing you to pick up on any tiny signal that fits your narrative? Give them the benefit of the doubt and look for evidence that might contradict your assumption. If you find yourself getting stuck in misunderstandings, experiment with changing your paralanguage. Slow down, lower your volume slightly, or add intentional pauses. Notice if it shifts how people respond to you. Sometimes we're simply talking too fast or loud for others to keep up, leading them to assume we're stressed, angry, or uninterested. Remember that a certain pitch or gesture might mean one thing in one culture and something else in another. Even within the same culture, a loud, open-plan office or a cozy, dimly lit living room can lead to totally different communication vibes. Being aware of context can help you adapt and avoid reading too much into someone's style. Always be transparent when it counts. If you're about to share potentially sensitive feedback, like telling a roommate their music is too loud, offer a bit of metacommunication first, like, I really appreciate you as a roommate, and I don't want to come across as bossy. Is it okay if we chat about the noise level? This extra step can reduce defensiveness right from the start. Finally, it helps to remember that nobody is perfect at this. We all misread each other sometimes. But if you make an effort to understand how metacommunication works, watch your own paralanguage, and keep an eye on your confirmation bias, you'll likely find your conversation flow a lot more smoothly. It's not about becoming a mind reader. It's about being mindful of the layers beneath the words. That's it for today's episode of Mind Matters. I'm Ivana, and I appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, remember that how you say something can matter just as much as what you say, sometimes even more. Take care and keep exploring the hidden layers of communication. I will link all the studies and references in the show's description. If you found this discussion insightful, please consider sharing it with friends, family, or colleagues. Let's keep the conversation going about how we can make this affluent corner of Europe a healthier, more equitable place for everyone. Until next time, remember, your mind matters, and taking care of it is the best investment you'll ever make.